Hey everyone, and welcome to the second workshop of our Rural Early Years Virtual Conference 2020. We're delighted to actually welcome Dr. Claire Warden, who's going to talk about emotional and physical well-being outdoors. What I would say just before we start is please open your meeting chat. At the top of the screen, there's a conversation button. If you press that and open it up, you'll be able to actually put comments for the chat, which we can look at the end. If you can switch your cameras off now during the presentation by Claire, thank you very much. And hopefully afterwards we'll be able to see each other again. So thank you very much, Claire, and enjoy, everybody.
All right, so delighted to be here. I'm just going to bring up my screen just now. Here we go, hold on. Share my screen. Here we go. So you should all now have in front of you a PowerPoint. So I'm delighted to be able to talk about my passion, if you like, around outdoor learning, but specifically today, thinking a little bit about emotional well-being outdoors, which of course is an absolute critical thing for us to be looking at the moment, especially because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. And so this is particularly pertinent to some of the stuff I'm going to be sharing. So the way I thought we'd run it today is that we're going to listen to a PowerPoint just to provoke us really to think a little bit about what all of this means in terms of our own practice. And then we're going to open it up and have a bigger conversation where I really enjoy having conversations. So ask questions, challenge me, think about the relevance for your own practice, all of those sorts of things. It would be delightful to be able to have a really engaging conversation at the end. So I don't know how much you know about my work, but I worked really thinking about two things. One is children's right to the natural world. And for me, you'll see in this conversation, the natural world is a really core and fundamental part of this. The other part of it is the child's right to be heard. And so I'm a rights-based thinker, but it means that I think children need to be outside and have a right to be outside. And they also have a right to be heard. So you may have heard about some of the work I do around planning, which is called a floor book. I'm happy to talk about that as well at the end if you wish. So let's start off really by digging in a little deeper. And this may seem an incredibly obvious question. What do we actually mean when we say outdoors? Because wherever I travel in the world, it always looks very different. So I can go outside and there be the most beautiful nature-based landscape. It's going to have a sand pit, it's going to have a mud kitchen, it's going to have trees and flowers and the bird song will be beautiful. But it doesn't always guarantee that the quality of interaction is there. It doesn't always guarantee that children's voices are listened to. So landscape isn't the whole picture. And then other places I've been to which have been more like this, which is a tarmac ridden space where nature is struggling to get back in, whether it's in a lump of grass or a bit of moss. And so in some of these places, I've actually felt and seen and observed the most amazing interaction by the adults. So we know there's something in all of this about the adult involvement, the adult interaction. Maybe there is something in here about the idea of relationship. And when we start to unpack the idea of relationship and we talk about outdoors, do we mean the relationship just between one human being to another? Do we mean that it's the relationship between the child and the rest of the natural world? Do we mean it's the child and their connection to birdsong? What are the relationships that are going on in your outdoor area? And do we really support those? Do we help those? Do we really help children to flourish in our outdoor spaces? Well, for me, I have to be honest, and I've already laid my cards on the table to say I am what you call a nature pedagogue. And so my PhD was to theorize and really explain, to dig deep into this thing called nature pedagogy, to unpack what's the difference between just moving outside and something a little bit deeper. Well, part of it is the fact that the natural world, as I would frame it, is both your location. So you're going out into really a space where your roof is the sky. So you are going outside. And so the natural world becomes your location for what you're doing. Yeah. but it also becomes your context. It becomes the thing that drives forward children's fascinations. It drives forward their inquiries, whether it's a little puddle that's on the playground, whether it is a small blade of grass pushing up through the corner of a paving slab. All of these things are integral into the natural world. And so the context that we explore is driven, therefore, by the natural world. And then the third thing for me is that the natural world also, therefore, provides us with the materials, the resources. So it is both the location, it is also the context, and it is also the resource that we use when we're engaging with children. Now, that is my ontology, my worldview of all of this, but you may have a different one. For some people, they've decided that for them, they're going to have a more plasticized outdoor area. So they're going to have plastic materials in it. With a sustainability head on, we have to look at our consumerism, we have to look at our trade ethics, we have to look at all these different things, because if you really want to talk about emotional and physical well-being for all humans, we need to start thinking about planetary decisions. We need to be making global decisions about not only the things that we buy, but also how we work with young children. So for me, my definition of being outside is being under the sky. And so a lot of people are putting up shelters, they're putting up huts. I went to one outside area recently where the whole of the outside area now has a roof over it. So I would begin to question whether or not that is really outside. It's more of a space of in between, a place of transition, which are amazing and fascinating, but they're not the same thing as being outside underneath the sky. So as I mentioned before, one of the things I think it's an interesting debate to have around is what is the difference between just being outside and nature pedagogy? Well, we've already said part of it is your decisions of landscape. Part of it is the understanding of how you want to work with children. How are you going to support them in these play-based inquiries? Now, we've been listening to amazing things about the brain and how the brain functions. So we know that now. We didn't know that 50, 60, 70 years ago. And so for some of us, we need to re-examine our own pedagogy, how we work. What are our underlying values? What's our philosophy about the effective way of working with young children? So for me, my pedagogy is very much about the idea that we need to be out in contact physically with the natural world, and that's half of the picture. But the other half of that picture is the child voice, so that we bring together the landscape and the design with the child, and then together we as the adult are working around them, watching how they interact, watching how they respond to each other. So when you say, well, that can't be right, surely how can you say the natural world is responding to children? But if we take it to the idea of a puddle, the child jumps in the puddle. The invitation is just, you can't resist it. It is irresistible to a young child to jump in a puddle. So they jump into the puddle, and then what happens is that there is a feedback loop to the child's brain, to their physical body saying, oh, this is fabulous. I'm really enjoying this. Look at the impact I've had on the puddle. And so they jump again and they jump again. So the research now is suggesting that whereas we thought that was all being driven by the child, what we're now finding is that actually it's a relationship. It's a two-way connection between the natural material and the child. It's how that natural material is working with the child, is actually responding to what the child does, that makes it so amazing. So I'll unpack a little bit later on, because that's maybe a little bit abstract, but it's the theory of hylomorphism, if you're interested in that work and you'd like to find more out about it. So let's go into what the research tells us, and there's lots of research out there. There's also a lot of stuff out there that isn't actually backed up by research. And I've chosen this particular piece of research because it's one of the first that's given real kudos in terms of understanding the pressure that we're under for an academic attainment. And so what we've now got is very strong evidence to say that being outside in nature actually helps with the core attainment of those skills, knowledge and concepts that many curricula are driving us to explore with young children. Now, before, we've always kind of known it, but this particular piece of research is very relevant because it's very strong. It had an awful lot of experimental evidence. It made sure there was a whole range of samples, so it didn't just take place in a rural environment or an urban environment, or with certain types of instructional teaching or play-based teaching. It had a whole variety of different types of approaches being used in the research process. It measured the outcome in a way that I'm not necessarily supporting, but it is a standardized test, purely because that was the way to convince governments and people in legislation that actually this is the place where children need to go. Now, all of this was pre-pandemic, and it's really interesting to see how we've now embraced the natural world as a result of something that was a global crisis. And it has done more for us in terms of putting forward the suggestion that we need to be outside than anything else, actually, that's been happened to us to date. The last point there is that there was lots of things about active ingredients, and we'll talk a little bit more about active ingredients as being these loose parts that people talk about. So let's drill into some of the research and what it tells us about the idea of emotion. So let's think about attention. Let's think about the stress levels children are under and that sense of joyfulness. Now, what we know is that being with nature, not just being outside, but being with nature. So I would suggest that's underneath the sky. It's about handling green materials such as leaves, but also the flowers and the dirt. Those are the things that we're talking about as being the natural world that they're connecting to. What they found was that obviously the levels of stress went down. They found there was the ability, just by being in this environment, to actually create a sense of self-discipline. Their interest wasn't initially actually sparked by something as simple as a blade of grass. And so there was a relationship there between the adult and the child to open up the possibility of the natural world, especially for children who were coming from a place where they hadn't really been outside much in their early childhood. Once that door was opened, however, enjoyment pervaded. It was just everywhere. And therefore, because they were happy and they were joyful, there was a physicality, and the physicality therefore led to the fitness, which we'll drill into a little bit more later on. Now, one of the things that I think it's really important to think about is the idea of the stress level of children. And so often when I look at outdoor areas and I look at planning, sometimes I question whether or not we just need to allow children the time to actually just sit, to be who they are, to sit with something that is inanimate, such as a teddy bear, but they have a great emotional connection to it, to allow them silence. And sometimes when I see children who are in nature-based outdoor areas or in a wild space beyond the gate, such as forest school or forest kindergarten, or just going for a walk in the park, you see the physical change in the child from going from a built environment which has high stimulus, going out and gradually seeing the impact of being in a visually complex space, but in a place where actually they just feel better, they just feel calmer. Now, when we see children standing alone, our tendency is to look at those children alone who are silent. And if we're not careful, we jump to that conclusion that there must be something going on here. Why isn't the child joining in? And yet for me, children being silent isn't a lack of anything. It's a full time. It's a time when your brain is in a place of maximum disequilibrium because it's probably processing so many different aspects of what it's just seen or experienced. So it's a full time. It's a time for your brain, for your body and the earth beneath you to connect. So we also know from the research that nature, and don't forget, we as human beings are an integral part of the natural world. We're not separate from it. We're just a primate on the bigger ecosystem that is the planet. But nature appears to offer these calmer, quieter, what I would call safer contexts for learning. And by safer, I don't mean that you've taken away all risk. But I think sometimes when we're talking about safety, we forget that actually it's not just physical risk taking. If we're going to talk about that maybe later on, there's physical risk taking. And so part of it is looking at that and thinking about the benefits of being in the natural world and being and doing these things that we want to do in our play-based environments. But part of it is also about saying, all right, what are the hazards? Now, when you look at risk management through a physical lens, it means that the thing you focus on is burns, bruises, broken limbs, things like that. But I would urge you to consider whether or not you're actually looking at risk as a bigger dimension. Think of risk as being physical, emotional, social, and intellectual. Because when you do that, it puts the physical risk taking into a much bigger picture. Nobody has ever written for me a benefit risk assessment on the intellectual risk of a monumentally boring worksheet. Nobody. And yet, what we do know is that some of the inappropriate experiences children are given, too seat-based, too much regular didactic teaching happening too early, actually has a long-term harm, has a hazard to the evolution of that child's emotional well-being. So we can look at outdoor spaces, and you heard me there mention the idea of beyond. So my work, I talk a lot about nature pedagogy as being the art of working with children, and it is an art, it is a skill that we have. And we can embrace the natural world inside our buildings, outside into gorgeous landscapes that we can create that are nature-based, and beyond the gate. Now, beyond the gate means that the natural world is there on its own terms. This is a natural creek in Australia, and we may look at this and think it's idyllic. It is idyllic, but we have to allow children time to explore it. We have to allow ourselves to be aware of things like snakes or spiders. And so much of our process is perception, is about our inner confidence to be able to see and enjoy and love the natural world. So all of this conversation we're having about emotional well-being has to also include us as well as the adult in the environment. We know that often the presence of loose parts, what I call nature time, which is a different sense of time, because if we are presenting loose parts, for example, the bricks and the stones, the leaves, the mud, and then we say you've got 2 minutes to do it, or you've got 5 minutes to play with the loose parts, you're not going to get to really what the theory of loose parts was all about. So the theory of loose parts was the work done by Gibson, and there's work done by Nicholson, and those two are often brought together. What they were trying to get across in this idea was that actually, for the child's sense of well-being, they need to be able to look at all the variabilities and possibilities. So if you took the idea of the leaf, how many different ways could I use a leaf? Give me time. And so slowing down the content that we're exploring and allowing children to work in nature time gives them this sense of calm, this warm cooperative sense, so that they're not being rushed, they're not being stressed. And so the natural world offers this point of difference for many children who are living very busy, very full lives. For some of us, our loose parts are very small and hard to find. When we're working in environments that are not ideal, so we don't have a lot of soft greenery around us, we have to be very vigilant to find those loose parts. But often we forget that actually the rocks themselves can be used for loose parts. It's not just the leaves or the flowers or the petals, they're the soft landscape, but the hard landscape, the rocks, the stones, the sticks, those also have a place in the work that we do. So one of the big questions for us at the moment, and something that I've been very aware of recently, has been our changing views towards the natural world as a result of the current pandemic. For the first time, everybody around the world has been affected by something that is minuscule. It is a virus. And so it has really challenged us to think both about our supremacy. So humans have always believed that they are at the top of a triangular pyramid, and that actually by being at the top, you're the master consumer, and everything else below you is actually for your own use. You can take as much as you want, you can do what you like with it. Now, as a result of this very smallest thing, this virus, we have realized that actually we are part of this global integrated system, and the human being is just in the ecosystem. It doesn't stand apart from nature, but we now are having to look at and revisit some of the decisions that we've been making over the time that humans have been on the planet. What's interesting is that it's had several different effects. So if we look at the first column here, many people, when the pandemic hit, saw the natural world as being to blame. It's COVID-19, it's a threat, it's the natural world, it's out to kill us. Look at that, I told you the natural world was really bad, it's a disease, it's going to kill off all the human beings. So this group of words became very prevalent when you started to analyse what people were saying. It was the fault of the bat. How could it be the fault of the bat? It was the human taking the bat and eating the bat in a way that released the virus so that it was transferred. So is it really the bat's fault? And then we started talking about words about attack. And so when you start to use that language of attack, and sadly, death has been a part of this scenario, we actually increase the fear. And we'll talk about that in a moment in terms of the impact on some of the children we're currently working with. And then we see the middle column where for us, we had to really examine how we as a group were talking about the natural world. And so we consciously started talking about the solace of the natural world. What does the natural world give us? Well, it gives us peace. It's a place of beauty. We can look at the gorgeous daisy on the pavement. We can focus on the busyness of a bumblebee. And there is a sense of solace that you're part of a bigger system that actually may well be able to find some form of balance again. We were very aware, because we were open as a hub, that children needed a different soundscape. They were coming to us from 2 years old to 11 years old at the outdoor kindergarten. And one of the things that we were aware of is that unlike other pandemics, which have been limited to different parts of the world, every part of the world was now reporting it. So when the radio was on, when the television was on, their soundscape was about the words that are in the first box. And we need to change that in terms of the emotional balance of the children. Their sense of well-being was really being affected by their inability to make a difference, but their awareness of what was going on. So we talked about escape. We went to the woods a lot. We talked about the need for exercise, which I'll talk about in a moment. But it gave us this comfort. And actually, one of the reasons that Scotland opened the outdoor nurseries that we have here first was that the research was coming out was actually it was a safer place to be. In that there was reduced hazards of cross-contamination through the virus being in liquids. And it gave us, the adults and the children, a sense of well-being. A small space where there was a normality, if you like, a predictability, that the rain was still going to come, the puddle was still going to be there, that the waves were still going to come on the beach. And so in places of trauma, you can find that the natural world gives a consistency and a reliability. And then the third box is about what we're now talking about in terms of the natural world. We're now talking about this could be our future. All of you, I'm sure, are encouraged to be outside with children more than we are inside. We're now talking about being green educators. We're talking about thinking about balance of the natural world, talking about sustainability, about how we support children emotionally through the natural world. So what happened was the media got hold of this. And so I'm drilling into this a little bit, because if we're talking about emotional well-being, this image for me says huge amounts. So we put the virus outside, first of all. We know from the research that actually it's the other human beings or the contact or surfaces that are the thing to worry about. But this image suggests it's the whole of the natural world. It also humanized the virus. Putting an eyeball into the virus makes it feel much more threatening to the children who see this imagery, because what they then perceive is that this thing has a conscience. It is targeting them. It is finding their family. It is making them stay inside. Then the whole idea of the child looking out of the window, the longingness and the message to stay home meant that for many children I'm working with now, they have got an increased biophobia. And the biophobia is an absolute fear of being with the natural world, driven by aspects like this, whether it's in media or just the parents' fear and perception. So we're going to have to work hard with the children that are coming through now about reconnecting them, helping them understand the space in which they're working. We know that obviously being outside has more physical space, and so it supports the idea of physical distancing. One of the things that was interesting was that the staff I was talking to were saying to me, yeah, we go outside, Claire, and it's the place where we feel best anyway, so we're very happy being out there. But one of the things that they were talking to me about was that although inside they felt they were physically closer to children, outside they are physically further away from them, but they felt they had a greater emotional connection and understanding to the children. And that was driven by their sense of calm, their sense of joint interest in something like a blade of grass or a beautiful leaf or a stone. So that's a really important thing to hold on to, that if as an adult you feel more connected to children outside, the likelihood is that this thing called emotional resonance, this sense of relationship between myself and you, built in a strong way, it's very likely that's going to help yourself and the children develop this sense of community, this sense of calm and purposeful play outside. So these pictures, I'm sure you've seen them, came whizzing out over the internet, which was a school in France who decided that the way to deal with this was to put children in squares on their outside play area, or indeed to spray marks on the floor and make children of 3 years old sit on them. So we know this is not the answer. And so one of the things that's a bit of a gift for you from the Scottish Government was that we set up something called the Virtual Nature School. And it sounds like a bit of an oxymoron. How can you put nature into a virtual world? But I was inspired as a young child by David Attenborough. And my theory was that if David Attenborough could inspire me through fairly basic television at that point, then maybe we could do something to help children and families who are in isolation, who we were all in lockdown at that point. I'm aware of the fact that some areas of the world are still in that situation or have revisited it. So we set up something called the Virtual Nature School, and so it met children in the morning at 10 o'clock. We have a bit of a chat, we watch a provocation film, we talk about all the possibilities, we go away, we do it, we come back and we eat lunch together on a screen like this. And one of the things that happened was that we then said, you know, these need to be free. So we've put all of those films up now onto a YouTube channel called Virtual Nature School. So have a little look. And what we tried to do was to take the simplest of things. Eating a raspberry off your finger sounds so very simple, but it can add a joyful moment into a day. Actually, looking at the vegetables you have in your vegetable rack is a place to start. So when you embrace nature pedagogy, we can be looking at the natural world inside, from a pot plant to a pot of herbs to the vegetable rack to a bath, right the way through to those models that engage spaces beyond the fence in terms of looking at things like forest school or any of those other wilder senses of pedagogy. We haven't all got this. This was sent to me by a friend who said they weren't too bothered by the pandemic. You can understand why, but most of us don't live in the Alps or have a swing that's in this kind of position. So what we have to do is to start asking ourselves, all right, what are the possibilities for us to build relationship with the natural world so that we can actually get a sense of emotional well-being, of physical well-being? So we've been looking a lot at the idea of animals in children's lives, and Richard Lou's good friend Richard Louv has just been writing books about the place of animals. And so we've been looking more at settings really engaging with things like the rabbits they used to have, or the stick insects, or the fish tank. And we're finding that actually the number of people who have bought dogs during lockdown has increased exponentially. That could be a good thing, because I think for children, there's a real connection to animals, as you can see within this picture. So that the therapy pets, the idea of stroking an animal that's another living thing, is so vital for our own emotional well-being. It can't be underestimated. So going into the medical part of this, I suppose, the understanding that sunlight, we know sunlight builds up our vitamin D, but we now know that there are these things called T cells. And within our bodies, these T cells are the ones that help fight infection. So not only is it a beautiful thing to do is to sit outside and feel the vitamin D building in your body, but also to understand that the T cells need the sunlight to energize themselves. And these special cells are actually the ones that we're now focusing on. We also now have research that suggests that there are plants in the woods that we go to, not just here in Scotland, but all over the world, that actually release a substance called a phytoncide. And these substances are in the air. And so as you breathe them in, they appear, through the initial stages of research, to bolster your immune system. Now, I've always known that playing in dirt is good for children because the microbes that are within the dirt come into the body, they build up that gut bacteria, and it's really, our health is so focused on our gut that we need to really be thinking about that and looking at the place of dirt. So I'm keen to whiz through the other part of this. I'm just checking the time here because I think it's important for us to have a debate about some of these things. One of the aspects, of course, is the physicality. And for some children, if they've been in lockdown, they've been in their home environments and haven't been encouraged to go outside. We know that we need aerobic exercise. And so aerobic exercise, I think, is going to be happening during this conference later on today. So that's really good to see it, because what basically we need is that blood to be pumping around our bodies. And that's important whether we're 2 years old or we're 99. We need to get those germ fighting substances where they need to go in our bodies. We, from this initial research, did a study looking at the idea of positivity in green spaces. And so we asked a large number, about 500 people, how they felt when they went outside. And so there was a general sense of positivity. Now, you could argue, well, that's because they've had physical exercise. Absolutely. It could be that they just enjoy being outside, and it's so therefore they're in the right place. Is it possible that there's something else going on? And I would suggest that in terms of health, we need to be looking at emotional health, spiritual health, physical health, and all of these things, I think, benefit from us being outside in the natural world. The type of people I think that probably choose to go outside first are those people who like a space that is unpredictable, because that's the natural world. You can't make a butterfly come by, you can't make the rain start, and so it is a place where we embrace the unpredictability of it. So thinking about your mindset and thinking about the support of children's growth mindset is really important. So I'm not going to really focus on the fixed mindset, but I'm going to focus on the growth mindset, because failure for me is such an important part of our lives. Because through failure, I would argue, we really develop confidence. And the natural world and being outside is so good for that, because if we build something with a pile of sticks and it falls down, it doesn't appear to have the same impact as if we had built a tower with commercialized blocks inside. There is something that has happened that has helped or has made children, I suppose, be more concerned about perfectionism when they're in an indoor environment with maybe more commercial resources. So failure outside and the failure loop is very common outside, and we can document that and help children to really understand that failure is part of being successful. The next statement is that I can learn to do anything I want. is about this expansive idea. And if you're an early years practitioner and you really like the idea of divergent thinking, so you provocate something here and then we see what happens, then that's growth mindset. Whereas if you're somebody who has got 30 children they're looking after and you're trying to get them all to the same point, that's a fixed mindset because you're bringing children to one finite point. So we can really look at our own aspects and how we interact with children outside. And I have seen a difference from people who have a little bit of a fixed mindset inside, just because of the way they've maybe been trained or their own philosophies, that they are much more open to possibilities, to developing more of a growth mindset when they're in the outdoor environment. We've talked about effort. It takes effort to go outside, especially on a rainy day, especially when you're really cold. But that meeting the challenge, going outside and digging deeper, finding that self-regulation that says you don't want to scream out, no, I don't want to go out in the rain again today. That's all part of developing your emotional well-being, because when you've gone outside into the rain or the snow, or you felt that the wind is in your hair, it's often not when you're out there that the greatest moment happens, but when you come back inside and you're sitting with a cup of tea after you've got soaking wet going, oh, that was crazy, but I did it. So the I did it is a really important part of the development of a child's emotional well-being. So I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of the raft. I talk a lot about children's emotional resilience. And we talk a lot about just how we can create an environment that helps children, especially those that have maybe had traumatic experience. Many children I work with are in a place of disequilibrium. And so what we can do is to see, if you like, that they need to build a raft, a stable raft. So a raft that is made up of lots of different logs that make a stable platform that will take them through their lives, will take them, if you like, in this analogy, down that river full of all of the bumps and the curves and the challenges. That's important to have a stable raft. Now, if you're coming from a place of disharmony, a place of real fear, of uncertainty, of trauma, your raft is likely to have one pole on it. And so at every turn, at every stumble, you are like this. You're in a place of instability. And so your energy is constantly being used up just trying to keep yourself going. So what is that raft and how do we build it? Well, for me, the word comes from what it means. So the R stands from reconciliation. That means we say what is happening. All right, so reconciliation right now would be, this is tough. You have to acknowledge it. It is tough. Yeah, there's a global pandemic. Absolutely. That's the reconciliation. Let's just accept it. This is the situation. The A is affirmation. So the affirmation is time's going to pass. We're going to get through to the other side of this. We're going to learn to live with it. We're going to be fine on the other side of this. So the affirmation is that sense of it will all be okay at some point. Yeah. F is forward thinking. So especially at the moment, it's about saying, let's aim for next year. Lots of people are talking to me now about 2022, 2023, because having a goal in the future, something that allows you to look beyond your current crisis to the future, is really important in terms of your emotional sense. And the T stands for together. There's been wonderful examples globally of people coming together during this pandemic. But I might therefore say, if I was talking to a child in this sense, I'll do that together, or maybe we could do that later on, or would you like to do that with Jason? So raft, thinking of the rafts that you build for children, helps you in your interaction. So, for example, if I saw a child who was trying to throw rocks, I would say, and this, I use raft in every sentence or as much as I can when I'm conscious of it. So the reconciliation is, oh, it's great fun to throw rocks, isn't it? And the affirmation is, well, I know you really love throwing rocks and you can still throw rocks. The forward is, we're now going to go over there and we're going to find a big bucket and the T is together. So we'll go over there and get the big bucket together, and then you'll be able to throw your rocks in there. So using those ideas of raft, I think we have certainly found very useful in the therapy work I do. So my final thoughts really in this presentation is that I would suggest we need to take care. We need to take care of ourselves, obviously, but also of the wider natural world and the planet in which we live on. So when we're talking about going outside, I'm pushing people now to think about learning and playing about. So you're learning about the natural world, the bugs and the beasties, but you're learning with it, which means that there's a synergy, there's an equal respect. And when you do that, it means that you're doing it because you want there to be a future for the planet, and that you're in the natural world as much as you. And that means it's part of a big global solution for our society moving forward. If you want to keep in touch, just for reference, these are some of the things you might want to note down. Find me, I'm on the Claire Warden, but you can Google any of these things, whether it's the Mind Stretchers Academy, Virtual Nature School. Yeah. All right, I'm going to stop now screen sharing, and I invite you all to put on your cameras so I can actually see anybody who's in the room. That would be nice. And let's start having a conversation about some of those things. Over to you, Karen.
Hi everyone, been brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. What I'd like to say to people is put your cameras on, you're more than welcome if you want to. It'd be really nice to see some more faces but ours. Also, you can put messages up on the chat screen. If you go to the above your heads, there's a little speech bubble that allows you to do that. It says show conversation or hide conversation. If you show the conversation, you'll be able to put your messages up there. What I would suggest, because there's 44 of us at the moment in the presentation here, if you can put your little hand up, there's a little hand up sign at the top of the screen as well, and if people do that, we can then ask them to say whatever they want to say. We've actually got some absolutely lovely statements already, Claire, in our chat, and actually I can read some of those out for you now. Let's have this one there. There's a lovely one that said about, here we go, I work with children with a range of complex needs from age 2 to 7. Prior to COVID-19, we would spend last part of the session, approximately 45 minutes outside as much as possible, and I've noticed that the children have been much calmer and happier. Lots of fear for some families who have still not been outside since April 2020. So interesting to hear the evidence-based behind this that you talked about, Claire. I was definitely trying to promote this to families we work with. Someone loved your picture of the tree hugging. You said they couldn't pass a tree without hugging it. I was lucky to be brought up in a rural environment, another person has said, with nature study being a weekly lesson in school. When teaching in a special school, my class was the healthiest as we went out to play every day except in torrential rain. This is a super talk, hearing theory behind practice. Again, absolutely love raft. Great way for all of us to live right now and always, but also as a way to build our children. Let's see if there's anything else here. Thanks, Claire. It was great. It's something I want to look into more. Inspirational, Claire. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's nice. Lovely words.
Really lovely. Yeah. Let's have a look. How do you encourage parents to go outside and embrace nature? That was a question, Claire, that's come up on our chat.
Yeah, totally. So one of the things about the virtual nature school, obviously, is that the Scottish Government decided to support us, which was fabulous. But the priority was areas of high deprivation, high urban areas. And so what you have to do for me is to start from where the parents are. And so often what we do in this kind of work is, you know, we've had all these conferences, we know all this stuff now, but the parent is still sitting here with a point of, well, I just don't get the point of this, you know, and we can send hundreds of bits of paper to that parent, but they're not going to go past that wall, basically, so they're not going to do them. So what we did was that we said, all right, if I was in a tiny flat in the centre of Glasgow, what would I have? And so we started actually looking at nature inside. That's where we began. We said, okay, we want you to try and find an apple. So for a week, all I did was about apples. It was just apples. And then we started to say, all right, do you have a potato? And then actually, maybe you could go outside and find a leaf. And so what we did was gradually, I suppose, sensitize adults, sensitize the families to saying, actually, you know, this natural world you don't want to go out into is in your vegetable rack and it's in the bath and it's, you know, so we did a lot of that. And then once they were comfortable inside, then we started saying, actually, can you walk around the path and see if you can find a leaf? So you start from where parents are, and then and forget what perceptions you have, start here. And then for me, it's always about walking alongside, consulting them, finding out what they want, what might be useful, because I think that conversation is often the hardest one to have. But unless we have that conversation about why they're not going out, then they're never going to take on board our advice. So, you know, we've had families who said, well, you know, I'll take him down the play park. Great, take him down the play park. So we go down the play park, and then what I'm doing in the virtual nature school is saying, here are some things you could do if you've got, you know, if you're in the play park and you're sitting on the bench. How about you watch this, or how about you do that? So tiny little moments. And the thing about moments, is that you don't realise how important moments are until they become a memory. So saying to yourself, all right, there's going to be a moment on every single day where there's going to be a connection to something outdoors or something about the natural world, even if it's only looking outside. And then gradually these little moments become memories, and the memories become embedded, and then the conversations talk about the memories, and so it starts to mushroom from there. I don't know if that helps, but that's what I did.
Hopefully so. Another comment on our message board is really excited to find out more about raft and how this can be used when interacting with children. So interesting to hear about the differences between children's relationships with manufactured resources and natural resources. Thank you, a wonderful session. We were just having a little discussion before we came on air, basically, about planning as well, and actually how you can connect between the outdoors and the indoors, because most settings at some point will need to come back inside, and how you can actually keep those experiences alive with the children. Claire, I know that you've used floor books and talking tubs in parts of that.
Sure. So so the floor books really started with me in a place called Swindon. And when was that, 1989 or something? A crazy long time ago. Anyway, but I was working with a group of children at that point in an area of high deprivation who actually had a very oral culture. So they were talkers, they were from traveling families. And so one of the things that I've always been very strong on is the fact that dialogue, talk should be the start. And so the floor book really started with me with a pen, writing down what they were saying to me, and then they would draw pictures, and it became a mosaic of experiences. Now, after all this year, of these years, it's become much more refined to have these very set, I suppose, aspects that I feel are really important. When you start looking at how people plan, one of the things we've looking at the moment is a new app, which is about a tracking and inquiry. Because what I was saying to people is, if you look at, so how many conscious intentional moments do you have inside your building, and how many do you have outside, and how many do you have beyond? Because if you're really talking about saying that the outdoor area is important, then there should be the same number of interactions, intentional moments, planned experience, whatever you want to call them, outside and inside. But often when you look at the planning sheets, what actually gets onto the planning sheet is what's happening inside the building. So the floor books, if you like, you take photographs outside when they're jumping in the puddle. We talk about what they were learning about. The children come in, they stick the photographs in it. They're the ones that write their ideas on it, and we're there to really facilitate and decode. And all of that is documentation. But at the back of the books, what we then do is put whatever curriculum we're held accountable to, because curricula vary across the world, but they're fundamentally the same, which are a series of outcomes. And then what we can do is, as our inquiry, our play-based inquiry is developing and emerging, we write a mind map at the back of the book to show that. And then the big outcomes of the curriculum just sit next to us. And we can then very easily show how we're achieving those outcomes in a child-led indoor-outdoor program, or beyond if you go to forest school. And so they've been really successful, because I think we have to show what we're doing outside as being really high quality. It's not just a place to blow off steam, although that's part of it. And I think we can do that by making those experiences visible.
Would that be the same with your talking tubs, Claire? They really interest me.
Yeah, the talking tubs, because we work in a place with children with a variety of special rights, because I don't like the name special needs much, but so I always talk about special rights. Children have special rights, and we all have a right to be heard and communicated with. And if you're working with children who maybe have mutism, multiple languages, they're more they're shy, all these different reasons why we don't communicate. But to sit a group of children down and go, so tell me what you want to do outside, is incredibly abstract. Yeah. So the talking tub is a collection of images, photographs, diagrams, things like that, and objects, real objects. So that's that hylomorphic learning I was talking about. So not plastic things, but real things. And they go into the talking tub and they're linked by the inquiry. So if our inquiry is on puddles, I might get 2 or 3 bottles and put different types of dirty water in them. I might put a pair of early boots in. I might put a tape measure or something to measure. So all of these objects go into the tub. And that means that when you sit down to have your conversation, you've got something to talk about. So it might be the child with mutism is just sitting there, and this is their picture and they're holding on to their picture. But you've got then something to say. So in the floor book, then you would write down Elizabeth picked up and is holding on to a picture of a frog. We'll talk about that later on, perhaps. So it doesn't matter if they're not speaking or writing. The point is they are communicating in a non-verbal way as well, just by their physical presence in your conversation. So yeah, talking tubs for me about enrichment. They're about bringing the beauty of the natural world into the hands of children in some of the harder places that we work. So we make sure that the photographs are in there all based around the natural world. They're all high resolution. They're beautifully printed, so they're not torn out bits of paper. But so therefore, when a child holds a picture of a detailed picture of a frog who's got ice on him, they are fascinated. And so we now have the research that says just looking at the natural world has a positive calming effect. It releases endorphins on ourselves, which is why most of us have screensavers that are mountains. We have pictures on our walls of bits of wood and all this. That's why we do it, because we're affected by just looking at the natural world.
But that also links back in, doesn't it? The children are getting so many benefits of being outside, especially at the moment emotionally,
Totally.
lowering those stress levels down. The floor books and the talking tubs are very inclusive as well for all children, whatever their needs may be. But it's bringing that inside, isn't it, and allowing that continue that de-stressing to continue.
Absolutely.
Inside.
There's a piece of research they could talk about objects of transference, and so often, when you see children outside and they pick up a stick. And the stick has been their thing and they love it. I had one little boy who called his little stick Bert, and he adored Bert. And so he had a real connection to this inanimate object. And what happens is that when you take that stick and allow it to come inside your room and put on the side or whatever, or to sit by the child, that sense of memory of connection they had when they were outside, when they found the stick, stays with the child whilst they then hold the stick inside. So we shouldn't underestimate the power of that emotion. It's not something that as adults we necessarily hold on to, but certainly for children, their sense of connection to these objects of transference are really important, and objects of transference can go in the talking tub.
Brilliant. We have a little question here. Claire, do you deliver virtual classroom sessions for practitioners to see these activities in motion? Because they sound fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, we do. The virtualnatureschool.org is the master website. It's under redevelopment at the moment. There's an international group doing it. So if you can't reach it through virtualnatureschool.org, then just contact me on my website on theclairewarden.com. And yeah, I'll link you up, and so you can have a go at doing it for sure. Yeah. We could actually do a thing where we could link in people in the Wirral with people in Scotland. We could have a little community in the virtual world where we're sharing that virtual nature to Scotland. That'd be quite fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Why not? Everything is possible. Growth mindset, everyone. Growth mindset. It's got to be. Yeah.
I know that part of your work is actually to support practitioners within the qualification area, and actually building that the nature pedagogy into that area. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, the one of the things that came out of the virtual nature school was talking to practitioners was that they were really enjoying seeing me working with children. They were quite enjoying the way I was framing the conversations, things like that. And I was like, that's great, you know, well, let's keep that going. And so we started to analyse where the issues were. And for some adults, it is about knowledge. We haven't necessarily had the experience. We may be good at talking about ladybirds and wasps, but do we really know the difference of the different leaves and all this sort of stuff? So some of it is knowledge, certainly. Some of it is definitely a debate around skills. And so we have an open debate on a Thursday night, actually. We have a nature pedagogy debate Thursday night on Zoom, and we just all get together and we talk about what we've been doing, how things have been going on. So there's that kind of informal support network. And then on the Mind Stretchers Academy, there are what we call learning pathways. And so the learning pathways take people on a journey of 7 modules or 6 modules or 3, however many they feel they can cope with. And we drill into how to actually use nature pedagogy in your practice, inside, outside and beyond. And obviously floor books and talking tubs. There are courses on those on that site too. So yeah, it's an exciting time. I think it's important really that we develop that more than ever, a global community to help us get through the pandemic. And I think one of the ways to do that is to really dig down to understand a pedagogy that puts nature at the heart of it, which is, yeah, for me is nature pedagogy.
Yeah, I also, when I've read some of the things you've been saying is about getting outside your classroom, getting outside the actual area of your setting, so getting out into the wild a little bit. And a few comments have just come through on the chat about how beautiful Wirral is, where we live, and there's some beautiful natural places. We have a lot of beaches here. We've got really good varied environmental areas that we can go into and explore. And I know that's something that you feel quite strongly about, Claire. It
is. I think, you know, for me, it's about understanding your sense of place. And so understanding your sense of place is about who you are as a child in, you know, your family, your community. But often what we do is that they've lost disconnect. Many families have lost disconnect to the actual land on which they live. And so it's really important for me that when you're doing, say, even the landscape design of an outdoor play area, you ask yourself, what is here right outside my setting? So name for me then, Karen, what would be something, a landscape feature around the Wirral?
We have, I think one of our landscape features that we enjoy are our beaches, and our beachside locations.
Okay, so one of the things that then you've got to ask yourself is, have all of you in your outside area got something that's more reminiscent of a beach than a sandbox? Because if you want children to really take what they have known in the outside element, the beyond the gate experiences, the community, and you want them to bring that knowledge into your setting, then you make that easier by replicating it. So rather than a square sandbox, you can have the square sandbox, but you shouldn't just have pure white sand in it, because that's not a beach. A beach has bits of shell, it has different rocks of different sizes. So looking at the complexity of the natural world right on your doorstep, whether that's urban, so teaching urban games, whether that's, you know, like in Glasgow, we've got the lots of barges and tall ships. So you then start to understand that you can do so much to help children and families connect to their natural space immediately outside your setting, by building up that skill level inside the setting, if that makes sense. So we, for example, here have lots of mountains. Where I live, I'm quite lucky to live quite remotely, but we have lots of mountains. And so we have a cairn, like a pile of rocks in the outside area, because here it's very common for you to take a walk for your dog and you pick up your stone and you put it on the cairn, and it's the way marker.
Yeah.
Well, therefore, in our rock area, we have to have cairns because that's their experience.
Yeah.
So it's all about that, looking at what's immediately outside you, and it has become harder as we've looked at urbanisation, but local parks would then become the place that you would think about and replicate and bring into your outside play area design.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have some really diverse parks on the Wirral. So especially one in the centre of Birkenhead, which is modelled on, well, the park in New York, Central Park, is modelled on our
Park. Yeah, great.
Park as we used.
Yeah.
So we're fortunate for that, because that has a lake in it. It has hills and stones and rocks. Yeah. I mean, it has the traditional playground bit, but a lot of it isn't. A lot of it is quite free for children to explore. So thank you for that, Claire, those ideas.
That's right.
Using our natural environment. So it's not just about the beach here, but we've got in the centre of towns, we have got lovely parks that we can use.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Claire, for that really inspirational workshop. And thank you, Karen, for bringing all of those comments and questions in at the end there. Some really lovely comments from everyone who was attending. Just a little reminder. So the next workshop will open at 12:15, and we'll aim to get started for 12:30. But for now, another big thank you to Claire for your words this morning, and we will end the workshop there.
All right, thank you. Lovely to see your names but not see your faces. Lovely to see your face, Karen. Thanks very much for inviting me. Keep in touch. Bye. See you later.
Bye.